Sometimes I wonder if there's a gaster equivalent for FNAF. Like, I equate the bite victim to our Kara as a character who is clearly important and we know several details about, but a lot of their actual characterization and true greater purpose in the story is subject to theorizing and debate. But when it comes to a gaster, something barely even shown to exist and shown maybe in one or two moments, I think there's nothing better than the Old Man Consequences. There's clearly something here, but unlike our many other odd characters, or even our comparably mysterious ones like the Shadows, there's something about this moment he brings and the feeling that comes with it. He's not some blip in the stream obscure Easter egg caused by random numbers that you just flip down and see and it blinks away or crashes your game. He's not even obscure on paper in terms of like, oh, your ability to see him. You're told explicitly how to get to him. You don't know what you're going to do, but you're told that if you go too far down, something will happen and there will be consequences. And I think that's the crux of his character. He's not some random jump scare, he's not a main character, he's not the focus, but he is a direct response to you willingly going where you know there will be trouble. It's interesting how he really isn't violent, he isn't attacking us, he isn't even really reprimanding us. And he's not praising us for going that far down either, it's just kind of this strange level of like, oh well, you went too far down, might as well sit and fish for a while. And with the previous theories, especially the one from the Squawksverse series, the more I thought about it, I realized there's only a few things OMC could really be, but there still isn't a definitive answer. Firstly, with FNAF World being some weird abstract state, and how it's related to the bite victim's mind in Happiest Day, I wonder if we can push this idea a little bit further. I mean, the map is shaped like a brain, and Cassidy in the logbook talks all about memories and prior experiences, and the FNAF movie Vengeful Spirit / Golden Freddy has their whole thing about manipulating Mike's dreams and stuff like that. So I wonder if FNAF World is literally just the bite victim's mind as some sort of traversable metascape that Cassidy is manipulating with the adventure characters. That could explain why Cassidy can't do anything other than peer in through the glitches as Glitch Fredbear, but Adventure Freddy can go anywhere or everywhere. Cassidy can't just rewrite who the bite victim is, but can create an entity within his mind for that sole purpose. And with that interpretation, Old Man Consequences could just be one of the entities that lives in FNAF World / the bite victim's weird mindscape. He's just a strange creature buried in the bite victim's mind. It also explains why in the original FNAF World, when we drown ourselves, we end up on this shot. As I've said before, I think it's very possible this is just a very buried memory and experience. Or at least it's a very plausible way to look at it. What's really funky is that this is called Happiest Day, though it raises the question of how? The whole point of the clock ending is to set up Happiest Day, yet drowning the lake somehow triggers a scene called Happiest Day, which is a scene where we are actively unable to achieve Happiest Day because we're not able to do a clock ending. I don't get that line, really. Though maybe I'm just thinking about that too much, and maybe it's just trying to say, hey, this is related to Happiest Day, or this is just trying to say, hey, this moment where this older figure is holding the two younger figures is a happiest day for one character. This could be the bite victim's memory of one of his happiest moments, for example. I just find how it's presented really weird. Now, I do wonder if UCN Old Man Consequences is still the previously established random character sitting in the depths of the bite victim's mind, or if he is a character like Henry, Mike, or Charlie sitting by the sidelines, but I don't really think he needs to be a prior character to fulfill this moment in this story. But before I get into the whole idea of him being a previous character, I do want to talk about my two kind of ideas for our bear character in this moment. One of them is showing that the created entity in FNAF World, Adventure Freddy if you want to call him that, or just the player character, after the clock ending has fulfilled their purpose and is now just sitting here in the depths with Old Man Consequences as the bite victim's soul moves on, hence destroying everything that was FNAF World. Letting these two rest as their world falls apart and UCN starts with Cassidy tormenting William. The Adventure Bear is wondering if there's anything left to do, but Old Man Consequences is helping explain that their purpose is now truly complete. The bite victim has moved on, and all that's left for these two is to sit there and wait as their world ceases to exist. There's no point messing with Afton, there's no adventure left to go on. Personally, I really like this take as it fits what FNAF 6 and UCN was heavily about. It was the idea of closure in the end and accepting that. In this moment, these are two characters we never really got a final note on in FNAF 6, letting their world slip by and move on. This was all there was ever going to be for them. For the Adventure Bear, it's hard to accept that they just need to be content with that, but it's happened, and they have to accept that. Now, I think one potential problem you would have with that is how pointed it is about Afton's character. Oh, leave the demon to his demon. That might imply our character has some agency or potential reason to want to step into UCN and stop whatever's happening. And if that's your sole interpretation of this scene, that does make the previous Adventure Freddy scene a little less likely, I guess. And I know it's a really popular opinion to try and say this is a previous character just manifesting as one of these two. And to be honest, if we're going to pick a previous character to be the adventure bear, I think it has to be the bite victim, and it's not even really close. It can't be William, he's the demon being left to his demons. It can't be Mike, or Henry, or really Charlie, because they were all ready to let William die and burn and just move on. Likewise, every single MCI kid is pretty unlikely, at least if the narrative is that Adventure Freddy wants to step in and stop UCN in some context. Maybe you could argue it'd be Charlie if it was something like, oh, I want to stop Cassidy from tormenting William. You could also maybe argue Elizabeth would want to stop Afton's death, but it's really strange for her to not protest more, or for us to not have the option to stand up and try to do something. Like, we're just told, don't do it, rest, and we seemingly just do. Or maybe you could argue it's Cassidy trying to free Andrew if you're a hardcore Stitchline Games believer. While I don't have as many hard points against Cassidy, I do think as someone who believes that Bite Victim is the one in Happiest Day, that there just is overall more evidence for this particular interpretation. If FNAF World really was in the Bite Victim's mind and all that, then obviously him being Adventure Freddy, or him having a relation to Adventure Freddy, or Adventure Freddy in some way representing part of his mind or personality, not to mention if the lake is somehow related to Happiest Day, or is Happiest Day itself, then there you go. If Bite Victim's the one receiving Happiest Day, he walks into the lake and moves on. That's him resting, as instructed by Old Man Consequences. He also has association with a bear, so that works, especially in the context of Happiest Day. He has a reason to consider entering UCN to try and stop Afton's torment. He hasn't seen firsthand how much Afton's done as much as the other characters, so him hesitating, even just for a moment, does sound like a logical character moment. It's just this little moment of, should I? No, I can't. Now, if you want to make this interpretation more of a happy reunion, you can swap Old Man Consequences to Mike rather than just an abstract entity. After all, the entire Bite Victim storyline is the consequences of Mike's actions. His red teeth and face could be a reference to the Foxy mask he wore in FNAF 4, and he knows how awful Afton is to the point where he could say, hey, just let the man die. It also fits him fishing in the lake if the lake is this memory of an older figure with two smaller figures. That could be the two younger brothers and an older parent like Miss Afton, or maybe even a less awful William himself. I could see that being a really desirable ending where two brothers finally make up after all this time and find closure. Mike being fully content to just let Afton suffer forever and stay a while, whereas the Bite Victim is ready to move on. My one problem with that, though, is the tone of the moment. Compare a lot of the big, dramatic, or more emotional scenes from the prior series. They have a very soft or somber piano, or some sort of weird, techno-y, abstract tension to them, you know? And we know Leon Riskin was well established as a composer in the series at this moment, including making songs for UCN. And this is how this scene is played. This moment isn't set up like a long-lost sibling reuniting with another one. And there's no I'm sorry or apology or something like that. Now, following those two interpretations, you could make the claim that it's Henry. And I can see that one. He is an old man, he does want Afton to die, and he doesn't have the same personal link to the Bite Victim that Mike's has, which could explain the more formal, just move on kid kind of angle of the scene. But then you have the question of, how does he get there? Why is he an entity with red sharp teeth? And more pressingly, the fact that Old Man Consequences might exist before the events of FNAF 6 entirely? See, in FNAF World, where Old Man Consequences already exists, there's the line at the start of the game, something out there went very wrong, that's why I'm here, which implies a direct relationship between whatever catastrophe happened out in the real world and Spooky Eyes. Also, I just want to talk about this line a little bit in general, so I'm going to go on a bit of a side tangent. Is Spooky Eye saying that catastrophe out there is the reason they exist in FNAF World or are able to access FNAF World? Or are they saying something out there in the real world happened and they need to fix it, and that's why they're going to FNAF World to try and start fixing the problem? For example, with option 2, William could be possessing Springtrap. Afton was supposed to die, but now that he can't die, There needs to be some other way for the spirits to move on, or something like Molten MCI, where they're spread apart across in the fun times, and now they have to be all brought together, and Cassidy needs the bite victim to do that. They would now be going to FNaF World to work with the bite victim to try and free all the spirits in Happiest Day. That is something going wrong that they would be going to FNaF World to fix. But with option 1, it can imply that Spooky Eyes exists in the first place because of whatever incident out there, potentially being the MCI itself. That is something that went very, very wrong, and now Golden Freddy / the entity we think of as Spooky Eyes is created, and Cassidy now has to try and do something to fix this initial problem, that being Happiest Day. Depending on what that event out there is, that implies the start of FNaF World would be before FNAF 6, as all of those events are tangible, real events that happen before its events. In which case, Old Man Consequences would exist way before the events of UCN. And obviously Mike and Henry are alive before that point. However, it could just be possible that literally all of FNaF World is after FNAF 6, and I guess Cassidy just doesn't start doing anything until that point. I'm just saying, depending on how you interpret the timeline, that can change the possibility of Old Man Consequences being a prior character. I mean, if he was, it wouldn't even be that weird. It's not like we don't interact with other distant souls throughout the events of FNaF World. Like, that's the whole point, isn't it? Help make ways to connect to the other souls for the sake of Happiest Day. You could also argue something like Old Man Consequences being both the bite victim and the bite victim. One part that knows William needs to suffer and they can't do anything about it, and the other that still has some innocence in remembering what their life was like before, hence the lake with the whole imagery of the older adult, and that one having to accept that they need to rest and just move on. And that also adds some interesting character development for the bite victim potentially. The part of him that knew William was bad, or at least understood he wasn't a great person, is buried deep in the depths of his soul during the events of FNaF World. However, in Ultimate Custom Night, where he's pretty much restored and ready to move on, he's much more willing to come to terms with it and face it head on, with even the most innocent part of his mind having to accept who and what his dad has become. Okay, now for the really, really weird one. Old Man Consequences and Princess Quest. Help Wanted 2 definitely proved me wrong about him being Old Man Consequences, but that's still really funky. See, up to Help Wanted 2, the only thing ever really implied by Old Man Consequences was that he was some creature, whether it be human soul or nonsensical entity existing in a metaspace. So the idea of him being in an arcade game, why is he there? How did he get there? He's a thing that can go into physical machines or digital processing? I mean, I guess Help Wanted 2 is kind of a weird metaspace anyway, but the fundamental mechanisms just completely baffle me. Though, just saying he is, what can we do with that? Well, firstly, we can talk about how he makes Princess Cassidy actually even less likely now. If Cassidy was the drowning bear, there's no way for them to be here as the princess. We're gonna have to do this a little bit as a flowchart. If Cassidy was vengeful, Red Bear drowning would be them resting according to Old Man Consequence's warning, moving on. In the non-vengeful timeline, Cassidy has no reason to stay around this late in the timeline, and them being Red Bear and encountering Old Man Consequences would be them drowning and moving on. The two timelines that people were arguing where Golden Freddy is somehow related to Old Man Consequences as Drowning Bear would have to mean that drowning is not resting. But if that's the case, then what is drowning? Why does going into this lake cause them to be in Princess Quest, or be able to be in Princess Quest? Why are they no longer tormenting Afton if they're vengeful? If they're not vengeful, what the hell were they doing by not resting? Why did they go into the lake, and what did that even entail? The only real avenues I can think of for Princess Cassidy anymore have nothing to do with Old Man Consequences. That's just another detail that's just here regardless. If Cassidy was a vengeful spirit and just successfully killed Afton forever or something like that, then I guess they could just be sticking around to prevent evil from lurking again. Or if Afton is somehow Glitchtrap or related to Glitchtrap, then I guess they would be following him and being a computer virus or a character to defeat him. But neither of those really have to do with Old Man Consequences. Maybe if you rework the entire concept of Princess Cassidy and Old Man Consequences to being, I am the vengeful spirit, you are my creation in FNaF World, and you are following me as I go on. Though, once again, that has nothing to do with them being Drowning Bear. Though I honestly think the Princess Cassidy thing is now more and more subject to being an error, mainly because we have several examples now, like Cassidy Kazoo and the haunted Golden Freddy figure, which were initially called Cassidy in some context and then removed because it was some sort of miscommunication or mistake. And now we have Old Man Consequences explicitly called OMC in the files in Help Wanted 2, but the princess is just the princess now. And we have all of the Help Trap files elsewhere in the game, which just overall implies they are now very consciously naming things with very lore-heavy names, which completely kills the argument of, oh, they just didn't want to spoil things or reveal things, but also shows that when they're considering the lore implications of file names, they're not calling this character Cassidy. and maybe there was some planned name for Cassidy or role for Princess Cassidy at some point in development, I don't think it's the meeting overall, especially when Consequences, the achievement you get in Help Wanted 2, is Vanny's eyes, with the Princess Quest minigames that replace the audio tapes that lead to Vanny being controlled in Help Wanted 1, in the arcade series that frees Vanny, should be probably about Vanny, I would say. Like Old Man Consequences or not, I feel like it's more and more tied to Vanny than ever. That does not mean the princess is Vanny, it just means at its core it is a series of minigames related to or about Vanny's storyline. Okay, dumb rant over now. Let's actually talk about goddamn Old Man Consequences. I'm sorry I got sidetracked so much. Without just having Mike or Henry be back or around, I guess for the sake of it, there's not really a reason for him to be here unless there's something more absurd going on than even just I am weird soul version of past people. I think this is why a lot of people have really latched onto the karma or god or like deity kind of incarnate representation of all karma in general. And that's one of those I can't really prove or disprove it. There's nothing that really says there can't be a living embodiment of consequence. There's nothing that says it can't live in the depths of a weird soul world, and there's nothing that says it can't be a weird crocodile fox thing. But at the same time, there's nothing really pointing to it other than it's a convenient explanation for why this entity would be in two different places that are very different story-wise. It really just is a frustratingly plausible idea that we can't make any steps towards or away from. Like, there's a lot of times where we can find, like, the blueprints to a theory in the first few steps to get to the final conclusion. But with Old Man Consequences, we have a lot of moments with him, but kind of going back to Gas or the start of the video, almost every single time we're left wondering, what are we looking at here? I guess it's kind of one of those you just have to pick however you think he works and run with it for now. Maybe future stuff will make him make more sense, but for now, I don't know. He's Old Man Consequences, I guess. But